Hello and welcome to Mythmakers. Mythmakers is the podcast for fantasy fans and fantasy creatives, brought to you by the Oxford Centre for Fantasy. My name is Julia Colding and I'm an author but also the director of the centre. And for the second time I've been joined by Jacob Rennaker, who is a Tolkien fan and also a language specialist amongst many other things. And we are taking a look at the Peter Jackson films 20 years on and thinking about the script choices and what mistakes were made, what great choices were taken, and also where the scope might be for future script writers and new filmmakers and television program makers to come along and do their own version. And today, of course, as it's the second, we have reached The Two Towers. So, Jacob, first of all, is this one of your favourite of the films, or where in the lineup is it? We've only got three to line up. Where would you put it? It's a bit like asking which of the Star Wars films you like. Both,
Exactly, right.
Same kind of question.
Yeah, it is. I would say it might be my least favorite, but only because, but that's not there. I think they're all, for me, again, like I mentioned last time, I see them all as just kind of like one continual story, especially since they were shot kind of continuously. So in terms of the segments or chapters of the story, yeah, I think I get more out of the characters and the world with the first and the third than I do in the second. The second is traditionally the most difficult to do well, right? It's the saggy middle, right? You have to get through. So the beginning, you have set up, you have your inciting incidents, you have all this, new things that are happening, crises, and then you still have to get to your, climax and resolution, but there's this big stretch in the middle that you have to do something engaging with from an audience perspective. And so I think it's good. It's very, I think, because of the battles, there that sometimes seems a little long. Could be longer. But yeah, I'd say, yeah. So the least, again, that's a hard, like you said,
Your least favourite. I mean, you're struggling to criticise something we actually really like.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
I actually really enjoy watching how they cope with a really difficult thing, which is what to do with the middle section. I mean, I get a lot of enjoyment from that. I agree with you. It's not. I would probably rewatch the first and the third more frequently.
Yeah.
But there are certainly plenty of perfect moments in the second, and some really great choices, which surprised me. I remember watching it for the first time, which I thought, this is really good. So before we think about the bigger structure, we're going to start with some smaller moments. First of all, let's think about the casting and the choices of language and that kind of thing in the second film. We were talking a lot about how Frodo was cast young in Fellowship. In this film, I think most of the casting there's less challenging casting in this. It's all pretty much on the same line as the book, though we do have, I suppose this falls into this, we do have characters popping up where they aren't in the book. Like Halbarad sort of rocks up to with the elves, rocks up to Helm's Deep. There are some choices like that, which mean that some characters are astray. So, were you happy with the casting choices? The new people, of course, mainly the Rohan. It's Bernard Hill and Miranda. I've forgotten her surname. The wonderful actress.
Otto.
Oh, thank you. And Kurt Urban is the Carl. Anyway,
Carl Urban.
Yeah. I always said Kurt Cobain. That's someone completely different.
But also with blonde, long-ish hair.
Yeah, and then of course there's David. Oh dear, I should have got my Faramir. Wenham, his name is. Anyway, Faramir. Pops up too. So, what do you think about? And I've almost forgot Wormtongue, another great character of Tolkien. Were you happy with the choices they made? I'm very happy with them all.
I am also. And it's funny that this was just a couple months ago. So watching the X-Files television series, American television series, um, and the fellow who plays Wormtongue. I'm so sad that I forgot his name. Um, he was in an episode of the second season, first or second season of X Files as a the creepiest, most sinister possible kind of antagonist, and he did. It was yeah. So it was a joy. It was a joy to watch him in another role. You got it?
Brad Dourif. Thank you,
Okay.
Google. I knew
Yes.
I was going to get that completely wrong and
So
embarrass
Brad,
myself.
yeah. So Brad was yeah, just an incredible choice for that level of yeah, kind of again the sinister, sneaky, sleazy, just dark, creepy. He's yeah, some sort of creature of the night
Yeah.
almost. I'm sure in real life, I would love to meet him in real life. And just have a good chat with him.
He's quite
Um,
funny in the making of, because of course he had to shave off his eyebrows each time he played the part,
oh
and
wow, okay.
his partner was getting quite cross because when he went for the pickups, he'd come back looking, again, not a good look, guys, if you're thinking of
Right.
shaving off your eyebrows. Um, okay, so yeah, I think in that case, we I don't think tonally there's much difference. I think
Mm,
all 3 films, they've maintained. It's not one of these scripts where they've had, like, loads of writers coming in and it doesn't fit. It feels all part of an
right.
overarching, trilogy. So, yeah. So what about, the perfect moments for you? Do you have any of those in the
Yeah, the one I can say just, one moment, the moment that somehow I want translated onto my tombstone is, Aragorn's return opening, uh, the hall doors at Helm's Deep, right? When he walks in, he's just, drug himself through the water, and the horse, Brago took him up onto his back and then took him back. But then, when he first, enters the hall there of Helm's Deep with that kind of slow motion, almost kind of half slow motion, pushing open the doors, and him just striding in there is every single time. It's just this like I just get this like surge of yeah, just like majesty and power, and you know uh, awe. And not that I am any of those things, but just so if somebody's stopping by my gravesite someday that they see that, they might get that, just have a nice
Yeah, I Jacob,
have a
I
nice
would
overall image.
suspect that you identify and root for Aragorn quite a lot. I think I can see this. I can understand, though. I can understand. Of
This
course,
is
that whole episode of him falling off the edge and being dead and coming back again is another sort of birth, death, and resurrection kind of, story, but it's not actually from the
it's not in
book.
the books. Right, right, right,
But it
right.
works.
That's
It works.
I mean I think again like I saw before I read the books. um uh, Two Towers was the film. So I saw The Fellowship and then Two Towers. And after Two Towers came out, that's what really, it was the end of the Two Towers film that really gave me the final push to dive into the books themselves. And then my life became consumed by Tolkien afterwards, forever after. But it was that, yeah. It was compelling for me and got me into a place where I wanted to learn more about those characters. But yeah, maybe yeah, Aragorn. And in talking about casting, just going back for a second with Aragorn there, here and elsewhere, Viggo Mortensen brings a kind of softness. I want to say, kind of almost like a feminine energy to this king, this powerful king. So he's this combination of, power and strength, but also this softness and care and nurture as this, king healer that you do see in the book. But I think he really kind of elevates that and brings out the kind of nurturing qualities of the king a little more in his performance there that I love personally and kind of is essentially kind of my model for I wish that I could be Aragorn as a father. to my
Yeah,
to my
good.
children. They could see me in that way. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good aspiration. For me, one of the perfect moments in terms of camera work and evocation of place and everything is when you first see the Golden Hall, um, Meduseld, and you've got Erwin standing on that very windy ledge that she stands on. But it just seems it's almost like a perfect Tolkien moment. The vistas, the scope, the sense of it actually having the air, it's a wild place. Yeah, the other thing I really like as well, which is a slightly odd choice maybe, I love that they use the Anglo-Saxon dirge for when they
Mhm.
bury, their
Phaedra?
dead.
Yeah,
I think this might only be in the extended edition, I don't know. But anyway, that that's lovely because, of course, they are the Anglo-Saxons in this
right,
world,
right.
a sort of cross between them and the Hungarian riders, of ancient history. Um, and so there's lots of moments there. Let's think, not forget, the journey of Frodo and Sam. Are there any perfect moments for you on that? Because of course there is the introduction of Gollum.
Yeah, yeah, you do have that. I think for me, the moments with Frodo and Sam, my favorite moment there in Two Towers is, Sam's monologue when they're around Osgiliath.
You've let right
Uh,
to the end here. We're going
right, yeah,
straight
yeah,
in.
yeah, exactly. So I'm going to the end, but in terms of the moments overall, just like that, where he's talking about, right, it's like in the great stories, the ones that really mattered, and he's talking about the characters living inside a story versus seeing the story from the outside, and what sort of difference that makes, from a person's perspective. And just like, yeah, so his delivery, um Sean Astin's delivery of that is just so earnest and pure and inspiring every time I see it. Yeah, that's a moment just like really charges me and thinks makes me think that, right, in the end, right, Frodo asked him, he says, that there was something that they were holding on to in those stories. And then Frodo says, what were they holding on to? What are we holding on to, Sam? And he says that there's some good in this world, Mr. Frodo, and it's worth fighting for. Right. So every single time that just, it is inspirational, kind of at its core. And yeah, that's, for me, that's one of the moments that in rewatching these films, those are the ones that I look forward to most and get the most out of, are some of those character moments. And the funeral moment also that you mentioned, that was one of my other favorite moments, is that entire burial scene and then the conversation
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
afterward between, right, our two kings, if you will, and the reflection on, burying your children is quite touching and moving. Yeah, just the Anglo-Saxon dirge just kind of, yeah, evokes that. And I think, yeah, I think
Great
Tolkien would
performance
probably
by
be
Bernard
happy.
Hill there, talking
Yeah,
about that. It's a very simple and stripped back scene just between him and Gandalf, but I think it feels so genuine because, of course, in the way the book works, Teardred's dead, sort of happy. It moves quite swiftly on,
mhm,
I think it was a really good decision to give a moment of grief,
yeah,
uh,
absolutely.
because the book doesn't have that breathing space in it. Um, So one more moment, of course, is I do think that when I watched it the first time, the Andy Serkis first schizophrenic
Hmm.
visual Gollum, that was just amazing when I first saw that. I mean, it's become so parodied that we almost forget how powerful that was. Really well written. I mean, it's all there in the Tolkien, but the way it's chosen and put together and then performed, I think, is another extremely perfect moment. One of the best scenes in the whole of the 3
Yep,
films.
agreed.
Okay, any, less good moments? The ones that
Um,
you think, "Meh, okay."
Yeah. So again, this is, I think, okay, look at a big picture and, Tolkien's own theory of creating worlds, right? Of myth making. So in, his essay on fairy stories, he talks about, the creation of secondary worlds, right? And that, your goal is to create a world that is internally consistent and that your mind can enter, and where it relates to everything as being true within that world itself, right? So the moment. So he says, that's the suspension of disbelief is one thing. He doesn't think that that's what fantasy does. Fantasy isn't just the suspension of disbelief, but rather the kind of invitation toward and fostering of an active belief in a secondary fantasy world. So, so he says, the moment that disbelief arises, then the spell is broken, and then the magic, or rather the art, has failed. Or it was his way of describing that. So, for me, the moment that absolutely, I was taken out of this film as a true internally consistent world was Legolas kind of skateboarding down the stairs on the on the shield and shooting arrows. I think if I would have seen that as a earlier teenager, that might have been my favorite scene in
That's
the
the
film.
problem, isn't it? It's kind of a different audience for that.
It seemed right. So that seems, yeah. So I think so that kind of like tonally, it seemed a little bit off. I would expect, I think, given how the elves act, it didn't seem quite as dignified. I don't know what I was expecting him to do, to kind of like float down the stairs and shoot arrows instead. I don't know what the alternative is, but it wasn't. But that was, for whatever reasons, that was something that during that intense battle kind of took me out of that secondary world and said, "Oh, I'm watching a film, not I'm living inside this world." So for me, that's probably the biggest example of something that was a cool shot and like a fun idea, but ended up, for me personally, kind of taking me out of the film for a moment. Had to
Yeah,
get
I mean,
back in.
Peter Jackson does go a bit crazy about Legolas, doesn't he? Because
Sometimes,
I'd sort of put that along that moment. I agree, because of the skateboarding feel of that. It does feel like a stunt,
yeah,
whereas even more absurd, but in a sense more earned, is when he takes down the Mummakil,
yeah,
the Oliphant in the next film. I'm
it
leaping
does the
ahead here.
same sort of thing.
That's the sort of, you can see him thinking, how do I tackle this creature? And he methodically works his way, thinking, well, I got to do this. And so it feels, I don't know, there's something a bit more within the world about that.
Yeah,
Again, it's an elaboration, it's not in the book or anything, but
right.
um, that for me doesn't jar, even though it's ridiculous. In The Hobbit, Peter Jackson goes completely crazy. He's doing anti-physics thing where he's climbing up falling rocks in the battle of that,
Yeah,
which really is just, and hanging off bats, completely, completely silly, basically.
yeah.
So I would put that sequence at one end and Mummakil at the other end, and the shield thing. Yeah, okay. I
Somewhere
mean,
there.
it's kind of all
Like, it
right.
works. I could see somebody actually doing that, yes, but I could see like me and my friends trying to do it. And I'm sure there's probably hospitals, emergency rooms, who have witnessed how many children have tried reenacting that down their own stairs,
Now you're
who have
worried because 'cause you've
thanked
got a
them for the
two-year-old,
business.
you
I
see.
know,
Yeah.
yeah. So so I have to be careful on which scenes, or just skip past that.
Yeah.
But so it was fun. Like, so it seemed more contemporary than something that fit into that world. I mean, if we'd seen something like that happen before, or there was a real reason, like he had to get down and we saw him taking the shield, and if it seemed kind of like an inevitable choice, that he had to get down, and the only way he could do that was with this. If it was set up differently, then I could see it seeming more natural. I think I can see a world or a way of shooting that in which he has to do this, and so I'm okay with it within the world itself. But
Mm.
as it's shot and as it came across to me, it seemed, kind of gimmicky.
Yeah. Okay. Right. So moving on from that, again, everybody, we're doing this about something we love. It's not that these are tiny moments which we're quibbling, not the whole arc of the film or anything. Let's think about the way it's structured from beginning to end. I think I want to particularly mention how it starts. So if you can cast your mind back to 2001, I think it was when it came out. Was it 2001? Somewhere around there. Um, I think that choosing to start with rerunning the Balrog scene, but flipping it to Gandalf's perspective was genius. It was
Mhm.
so unexpected, but also um, sort of doing a reprise. This is the important moment. This is the moment that's haunted Frodo. It was very clever. So I love that. It's one of my favorite openings. Actually, it is my favorite opening of all the 3 films. It's the one that I think is the best bit of filmmaking.
Yeah, agreed. And the cinematography during that section, right? So you're hearing the noises of the battle as you're getting this big kind of like panoramic, sweeping shot of these, snow-covered mountains, and you're being set up with, a sense the scope of this film and what's happening. You're immediately stepping into this wide world, and then you're hearing the conflict. And so it's giving you a chance to like ramp up to remember it. You're almost being primed to remember it, and then you actually get in there, zooming in, closing in, and then getting inside the mountain and looking at that. Yeah, it's beautiful. It's a great, a very powerful way to start the film, with doing a small recap, like you said, to get what's the minimum amount that you have to do to get people up to speed to get into the film. And I think that was a brilliant decision and way of doing that. It was very effective, I felt.
So in terms of the structure, they have the problem that Frodo and Sam's journey is quite unrelentingly miserable. There's a brief spell with Faramir in the books where things look up for a little bit, but it is lots of rocky or ashy or swampy landscapes, muted tones, lots of suffering, and either 3 actors or 2, so very intense. So they've got 2 films, 1.5 more films to do this, and I think it's really tough. It's tough in the books. I mean, I love those bits because I always think that the real adventure is the mental struggle, the journey that's going on, and the way that their relationship changes and shifts. So I think I find it fascinating, but I know that my own children, for example, they much prefer the Pippin and Merry and, the colourful fighting, the travel, the other stories. But of course, those stories are actually just settings to allow Frodo and Sam to inch slowly to their destination.
Right.
It does present a problem because how do you make Frodo and Sam as interesting so people aren't skipping? How do you do that? And did they succeed?
Yeah, I think I think so. Yeah, I think visually you're right that you definitely are distinctively seeing different environments there. And yeah, so of course the introduction of Gollum there is really, I think, what helps you keep those 2 worlds separate and engaging and entertaining. The tensions that are created there that are that are kind of slightly different than the books in terms of kind of your triangular relationship between Gollum, Frodo, and Sam. Because Gollum,
I think the Two Towers actually it keeps closer to the book. We haven't got to Return of the King. It diverges a lot there.
mm,
So, but there is already tension in the books between Frodo having empathy for
mhm,
um, Gollum.
Gollum, and I think from this, and I think so maybe to clarify what I think in the films, I had greater empathy for Gollum in the films and how they set Gollum up. And I think in part it's the character design, right? So he's, he looks sad and sorry, and he has giant eyes, so
Almost
that
cute.
right.
Sort of.
So right, and in Andy Serkis's incredible performance of Gollum, and then you see, and again, like you were saying with the dialogue, or it's I don't know what you call a monologue with yourself, where you're actually 2 distinct personalities, a monodialogue, um, internal dialogue. But he's, that going back and forth, the seeing Gollum, and in Elijah Wood's Frodo, you just like being able to tell by looking at him his pity
Mm.
for Gollum. I think I picked up on that more so in the films. It was easier for me to see visually, and I got a greater feel for that than in the books. How it's described, yeah, I felt like it came across more. And again, I think perhaps that might just because film is a visual medium, and it's easier for me to respond and react to something that I'm seeing that looks like me actually visually in front of my eyes. So but yeah, I think I absolutely agree with you that that Gollum talking to himself, Andy Serkis's performance, just really elevated that character of Gollum, and I think that's what is interesting. I think helps carry the Sam and Frodo parts more is that element.
I mean, the other thing to mention, of course, is that the books do the first half, book 3 in Tolkien's count, which is the first half of the Two Towers, is all the other characters, and book 4 is Frodo and Sam. And so what they've done is they've chopped it all up and then put it back in more or less sequential order, though I think perhaps um, the the point they finish a little bit early, um, just because the way Tolkien's written it, the point at which the two I'm going a bit on going on too long, but basically they've changed the timings so that the stories run together on the same timeline, whereas Tolkien sort of did, here's a bit of this story, here's a bit of that story. Um, and I think that helps by putting it one after the other, because you are then having the thing where you've got one kind of tone and palette and color, and then you swap back to that. And then you never forget Frodo and Sam. So that was a good choice.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay, so we've got some new characters cultures really to mention. Um, we've already started talking about Rohan. Were you happy with the way that was realized? In particularly, I think looking at the big three, Erwin, Emma, and Theoden, the way they were characterized, there are some interesting. Um, your discussion about magic in our previous podcast, the way they explained Theoden's possession, I think, was an interesting change.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. No, agreed. And that was, one of those other visual elements that took me out momentarily was, Theoden's kind of transformation from this, hoary, white bearded, almost like Father Time, grumpy Father Time figure to then, his beard kind of shortens magically, and his hair color changes. But yeah, I think the depictions of them, they all give powerful performances. Éomer, right, in his sadness and the tragedy of him kind of being exiled, in a sense, there was really really affective for me. And then Éowyn, what she's struggling with there, the slight change in Éowyn in regards to her relationship with Aragorn. That's something we'll probably talk more about, is kind of a little shift in what the emphasis is that the screenwriters chose to kind of highlight and elaborate on, maybe a little more. That was something that from the film, again, just reading or not reading the books until after I'd seen the Two Towers, it seemed consistent and made sense. But now, yeah, going and looking at the source material and being more familiar with that, then you do lose something in in emphasizing the particular aspect of Éowyn, namely her kind of wholehearted I don't know, obsession or devotion to Aragorn is. You lose a little bit more of this incredibly powerful kind of independent spirit that wins arguments and is a force to be reckoned with in her own right. I think you lose a bit of that sense by kind of tying her sense of self to Aragorn so much in the film.
She does have, she does fall for him. She falls for what he represents. But I think that they try to give her a bit more airtime
Yeah.
by putting in some extra scenes. And there's a moment where she's complaining um, in Helm's Deep, for example, which I think is an addition because she wasn't there. um, so, yeah, I know what you mean. I think she feels. She feels less dutiful in a way. I mean,
Mm.
I think, but I don't mind it. I think they're looking for areas to expand her character, aren't they?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And it also goes to your point that you made in the last podcast about when there is an opportunity to conflate two characters to do one job, then do so. So the situation where Éomer is sent away, that doesn't happen. He's not the one who's sent away. He's at Helm's Deep, and it's actually Halbarad who, not Halbarad, Erkenbrand. Sorry, I'm getting the names right. Who comes, and he's you're probably thinking, who on earth is he? He's another. The world of Tolkien is bigger. There are people you never meet in the films who appear there. So that was all a good choice to give that story to Éomer. Though he does come across as being a little bit churlish at times.
Right.
But it's fine. That's an interpretation. What about? So yeah, we're mainly thumbs up for Rohan. They do look a bit. I think Bernard Hill makes a crack in the extended edition. I think it's him about how his armor is so much better than everybody else's. They do look quite poor and impoverished, but I suppose an Anglo-Saxon village would have been like that. Maybe.
Yeah, right.
Your king would have had all the gold leaf. What about the Ents? Is Treebeard your Treebeard?
Yeah, that's a good question. Again, so it was it took me a while to place the voice, right? John Rhys Davies does the voice of Treebeard as well. So hearing that, I was like, I know that was one thing that was somewhat distracting, is I know I've heard this voice before. And then again, going back to my being raised half on Star Wars, half on Indiana Jones, was hearing John Rhys Davies' voice, then placing that, which he has a great voice for it. The character design, I really liked the character design, especially like right when you have your Entmoot, right, with where you have all of the different Ents gathering together, visually depicting different types of trees, kind of almost having like one emissary from a different type of tree, different species of tree together. So I really liked what they did there. In terms of his attitude, demeanor, I think, as I mentioned in the last podcast, Tolkien's way of writing about nature is, transcendental in a sense, right? It's so his descriptions of the forests and Treebeard, his kind of depiction, embodiment of trees, you can tell this is a man who loved trees, that Tolkien loved trees, right? And so it's just a joy to see him give a tree a chance to speak. And so, and with that, there's this sense of, right, this wisdom and knowledge that comes from a long life and living life slowly, which is more kind of aligned on the Hobbit end of things, right? Hobbits live their lives slowly, right? So they're kind of closer to trees and how they experience the world, it seems, in a sense, than the world of men and elves. Well, elves have, again, this impossibly long lifespan, but especially with men, that they're kind of like action oriented, and they have this kind of small scope of vision, and what's happening and what they're concerned with. Whereas the elves have this kind of long institutional history that they've lived through. So I didn't get that sense of wisdom from Treebeard in the film, is what all that is to say. Is that I think, that was one of the biggest differences I saw, was that he's almost, because of how slow he is, he seems slow in every sense of the word, mentally and physically.
That's a change which I think isn't for the best, which is, in the book, Treebeard has already pretty much decided that they need to do something. But how that would run in a film is Treebeard takes them to a meeting, they wait outside for a long time, and then they decide to go and do something about it. So they've added in the jeopardy of them deciding not to act.
Right.
And it takes Merry and Pippin to challenge them, and then to bring them to confront them with the damage that Saruman's been doing. That's a change, and it means that Treebeard is less. Treebeard knows. He knows what needs to be done, and he's talked to Gandalf. So the decision is pretty much, from his point of view, taken. So he's not the book Treebeard. He's a perfectly decent film Treebeard. But I think that if you're listening to this and you've only seen the films, I would definitely have a look at how the Ents behave in the book, because it's very interesting, and the differences. There's a great extra Ent who you meet, the young one, Quickbeam. And what I do like is the way they all storm Isengard.
Mhm.
I thought, how are they going to do this? It's just like an impossible thing to realize, but I think that is very well realized.
Yeah.
With all the set pieces of breaking the dam, and how would a tree take on a building?
Right.
I think they did a smashing job on that. Very good. Okay, sort of the final piece I want to look at in Two Towers is Faramir and the little trip to Osgiliath. That doesn't happen in the books, folks.
Mhm.
What happens in the books is Frodo and Sam are taken to the cave where the waterfall is, and that's where the confrontation with Faramir happens. And Faramir is much, much nicer in the book than he is in the film. I have a couple of problems in the film. He is shown as condoning beating up Gollum,
Mhm.
and he's also drags them off to Gondor. He wants to take the ring. Now, in the book, the point is Faramir doesn't. He refuses. It's they've changed that journey, and that's a really big change. It's done script purposes to again add a bit of drama and tension. They need an antagonist at this point. So okay, here's Faramir. He's not much of a story if he's just a nice guy who helps them on the way. Um, they have to give him a bit of edge, but it means that he's wrenched out of his. It's not consistent with the Faramir you then meet again because they've done this to him. So I have a problem with that. I think it's really unfair to Faramir that he has this sort of pro-torture little moment in his
Right.
life.
Right. Yeah, no, agreed. And I think you're right, that's for, screenwriting purposes, the changes in Faramir do help create, kind of this triangle between Denethor, Boromir, and Faramir, right? So you have that kind of triad where Denethor is kind of pitting Boromir against Faramir. So it heightens the tension and drama there. But you also have in at the same time trying to give Faramir a character arc, right? So that's another thing with all of these different characters. They feel like they have to have an arc. So with Aragorn,
Mm.
we talked about a little bit last time. He's kind of this unassuming king, as we've actually seen in the first film that he, Elrond says that he's turned away from that path, right? The path of kingship, and that he's is hesitant, or if not, waffling on whether or not to actually be king, if that's something he knows this is his right, but is that something that he wants to do, that he should do? I think they do that. You definitely see that more in the films than in the books. And then part of that is to create a character arc for him, right? So you need a character arc for every one of these main characters. They has to be, and you have to make it the largest arc possible to make it as compelling for
Yeah,
audiences to
yeah,
follow, right? So Faramir, if you just have him as, this kind of paragon of virtue and loyalty, and justice, then you don't get as much an arc for him as a character. You get him as kind of a static character, which isn't as engaging. And so if you want him to have more screen time, he has to be making some sort of change across scenes. And so here, yeah, I think that's part of the purpose. So there's definitely a different feel for the character in the book as opposed to the film. And sometimes where I think you understand a bit more in villainizing Denethor, right? So Denethor, instead of coming across in the books as just kind of a resigned, kind of cold leader who does what's necessary, recognizes that he has to face a loss, and then it's kind of managing that loss, as opposed to kind of an actively evil, almost villainous, kind of bent here in the films. In doing that, you're that character kind of almost elicits that, it seems, from Faramir. Um, that the Faramir, if he has to live up to this particular version of his father, the
yeah. There's a
film
good
version of
extra
his father.
scene with the original time they take Osgiliath with Boromir doing a speech, and then the brothers together, and then the father comes along. It's a very good extra scene, sort of establishing that trio. I like that very much. That scene. I just wish they hadn't done the beating up of Gollum. It just
Yeah,
felt
and that plays
really,
differently now too, as well. So then looking at that 20 years later with, the discussion, public discussions about torture, right? Military torture and its
yeah,
place or not, or, the ethics of that. In interrogation. So yeah, that definitely reads differently now than did, and it did, and it read, as shocking and yeah, and wrong, I think, at the time, but even more so now as the world and the conversations that we're having today have changed. And our emphasis, I think, seeing that scene, yeah, is definitely, you're seeing that as, you know an analog almost for police brutality that
yeah.
exists, right? And is it a serious problem? And so that does certainly, the extra, the sort of conversations that we're having in terms of what's happening in the world today, it's impossible to divorce that from our experience watching these films. And
He
so now
hasn't
if
done
somebody,
anything wrong at that point. I
I
mean,
know,
he has
right?
done things wrong, in the past, but as far as Faramir knows, he's just being roughed up because he looks a bit
Yeah,
orcish.
because of how he looks. Exactly, right? Or he's visited that pool, right? That he said that they established in the film that this is this pool that the
It's before he
consequence is death.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, sorry.
So
Yeah.
so you do have at least some justification. You're set up in the film of this is an important. They don't describe why, right? It's some sort of sacred pool, and that if you enter and take something out of it, right? That if you're there,
This is just
then
to keep,
penalties.
keep their, HQ secret.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So
It's that thing.
so
He's a
it's death.
spy, they think.
Right. So there's, yeah, so that's what I think. So that's what provides at least the justification for the, I think, for the characters, but from the audience, I think, yeah, it's hard to buy in or be sympathetic toward him standing there watching this poor little frail creature with huge eyes get pummeled.
Yeah. So there we go. This is the scene, future script writers, that it'd be great if you could if you're going to give Faramir a character up, what would you do? What was your, decide a different one and have a go
Mhm.
at that, because we think this one is a bit of a not quite not quite hit the target there. Right. So again, there is so much to talk about in all these films, which is a lot of the pleasure of them. But we've come towards the end of the Two Towers, and we're going to leave on the cliffhanger as the film does, not knowing how it's all going to end. So we always have a sort of little moment where we think where in all the fantasy worlds is the best place for something. And we've talked about Treebeard. So, Jacob, if you were a tree, a sentient tree, which fantasy world would you like to find yourself in?
Yeah, well, and I have to, bracket Middle Earth for that. So this is outside of Middle Earth, just because how
Okay, because
Tolkien
obviously,
describes it.
obviously you'd be in Middle Earth, yeah. Otherwise,
I would absolutely be there in the Middle Earth as Tolkien himself describes it.
mm,
But outside of that, I think it's not. So it's somewhat fantasy, or it's kind of a borderline fantasy with magical realism. Have you read Monster Calls
mm,
by Patrick Ness?
yeah, based on Ron Dowd concept. Mm,
Exactly. Yep. Yeah. So uh the tree there are kind of the monster, the titular monster in A Monster Calls, that yew tree. Uh that landscape and what he does, and for those of you who haven't read, I highly recommend it, and especially the original illustrated version, illustrated by Jim Kay, has some gorgeous illustrations that really add to this. It's essentially a story about, right, the power of stories to help us understand our lives and to cope with tragedy and loss, right? So deeply moving story, but it's facilitated by this yew tree who tells a series of stories to this child who's coming to terms with his mother's terminal cancer. And so just how, and I loved the book, and then the film. I don't know if you've seen the film adaptation of A
yeah.
Monster Calls. It's well worth seeing. It's written by Patrick Ness. He does the screenplay, and there's some elements that he adds that kind of amplify the story from the book that he adds to the screenplay. So it's a really interesting example of a book that's great and an adaptation that is at least as good as the book, in part because the author of the book is also the author of the screenplay. But the way that this character is depicted, Liam Neeson voices the tree, so you have, uh, I don't know if it's kind of secondhand Aslan vibes that kind of are coming through from visual depictions of animated characters, but Liam Neeson's depiction of this tree and this wisdom that this tree has in being kind of harsh, but also loving, right? Kind of being firm in a world where trees can interact with little boys and help them through difficult times. I think that's something that is compelling to me, again, perhaps because I have a little boy of my own that I would hope I could be a wise tree and impart, share stories to help him get through hard times that he will inevitably and unfortunately experience in his life. How about you?
Well, I first of all thought a little bit about Avatar, the world of the
Okay.
Avatar, but I actually, it's not one I love. So my thoughts went back to what I read as a child, and I don't often think about Enid Blyton anymore because she's fallen out of favour or whatever. I don't know, but I loved as a child the Magic Faraway Tree stories. Now I don't know what they'd be like to read now, but what I remember, this is the difference between what they could be. I have no idea. But what I remember is there's this massive tree with lots of people living in it, lots of little like creatures living in it. But the best thing about it all is at the top, a different world touches the top of the tree and it moves on. So the children can climb up the tree and have an adventure, but they have to leave before the world moves on or they get stuck. That's a bit of jeopardy there. And I love the idea of this. I suppose it probably in the background there's the tree of the world and all those sort of mythic trees is influencing that. But I remember finding that a very powerful tree as I was. I think I won't go back and read it again because I want to keep the fact that it was so amazing still in my mind. I don't want to sort of challenge that. So the Magic Faraway Tree, I'd like to be that. Thank you so much, Jacob. And I look forward to talking to you about Return of the King. So
thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Mythmakers podcast, brought to you by the Oxford Centre for Fantasy. Visit oxfordcenterforfantasy.org to join in the fun. Find out about our online courses, in-person stays in Oxford, plus visit our shop for great gifts. Tell a friend and subscribe wherever you find your favourite podcasts worldwide.